If only I had ignored that phone call, my mother would still be alive. The call came at exactly 11:47 in the night. It was an unknown number glowing brightly in the dark of my bedroom. I almost let it ring out. I was exhausted from a long week at the bank, and late-night calls never brought good news. But something deep inside me, a strange and restless feeling, forced my hand to reach out. I pressed the green button and answered. That was the exact moment, the very night, when everything I thought I knew about my family completely shattered. I held the phone to my ear and heard heavy, shaky breathing on the other end. A trembling elderly man spoke. He did not say hello. He only said one terrifying sentence. Your father did not die the way they told you. Ask your mother about the blue envelope. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, to ask who he was, the line went completely dead. There was no name given. There was no further explanation. There was just empty silence filling my quiet room. I sat up in my bed, staring blindly at the dark screen of my mobile phone. I could not go back to sleep. The stranger's raspy voice echoed endlessly in my mind. My name is Na Shika Mensa. I am 28 years old, and I work as a banker here in modern-day Accra. For the past 5 years, I have been the responsible eldest daughter, the protector of my small family. We live a quiet, middle-class life in our house in East Legon. It is just me, my widowed mother, and my younger brother, Kabi. 5 years ago, my father died in what the police quickly dismissed as a tragic armed robbery gone wrong. We buried him, we mourned him, and we tried our best to move forward. But this phone call ripped open every healed wound. The old man's words felt like a heavy stone dropped into a still pond. Who was he? How did he get my private number? Why was he calling me in the middle of the night, half a decade after my father was put into the ground? I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and walked over to my bedroom window. I looked out into the quiet street, wondering if someone out there was watching our house, hiding in the deep, silent shadows outside, waiting for me to make a move. The next morning, the bright Accra sun spilled through the windows of our home, making everything look terribly normal. My mother was in the kitchen, humming a familiar church hymn as she prepared breakfast. Kabi was sitting at the dining table, complaining about his upcoming school exams while chewing on a piece of bread. I stood in the hallway, watching them. At first, I tried to convince myself to ignore the midnight caller. I told myself it was just a cruel prank played by a very sick person. But the words kept replaying in my mind, refusing to leave me in peace. Blue envelope. The phrase repeated itself with every tick of the living room clock. I knew I had to find out the truth. After my mother and brother left the house for the day, I found myself standing in front of my late father's old study. We rarely went in there anymore. It had become a shrine to a ghost, smelling of old paper and stale air. I turned the brass doorknob. The lock clicked open. I stepped inside the quiet room, feeling like an intruder in my own home, ready to search for a secret that might destroy us. The study was exactly as he had left it 5 years ago. His large wooden desk sat in the center, covered in a thin layer of gray dust. Books lined the tall shelves against the walls. I started my search methodically. I opened every drawer, flipped through his old diaries, and checked between the thick pages of his favorite books. Hours passed. My hands were dirty, and my heart was beating fast with frustration. I found nothing. I was about to give up and accept that the phone call was indeed a terrible joke. Then, I leaned against the heavy oak bookshelf. I noticed a slight shift in the wooden paneling right behind it. I moved the books aside and pressed my fingers against the wall. The wood felt loose. I dug my fingernails into the tiny gap and pulled hard. A small, square section of the wall popped out, revealing a dark, narrow cavity hidden from the world. I held my breath. I reached my shaking hand into the dark hole. My fingers brushed against something smooth and flat. I pulled it out into the daylight. My stomach dropped completely. It was right there, exactly as the man said. I stared at the object in my trembling hands. It was a faded blue envelope. It looked old, worn at the sharp edges, as if it had been handled many times before being hidden away in the dark. Written across the front, in my father's unmistakable, elegant handwriting, were words that made my blood run cold. To my children, if anything happens to me. I slowly sank into his dusty leather chair, unable to support my own weight. The silence in the study felt heavy and suffocating. My father had known. He had known something terrible was going to happen to him, and he had prepared this message just for us. Why had my mother never found this? Or worse, did she know it was here all along? My fingers traced the dried glue holding the paper flap closed. I hesitated for just 1 second. Once I opened this, I knew there was absolutely no turning back. My life would be divided into before the envelope and after the envelope. I took a deep breath, hooked my thumb under the paper flap, and ripped it open. The tearing sound echoed very loudly in the quiet, empty, and deeply forgotten room. Inside the envelope was a thick stack of folded papers. I carefully spread them out across the dusty surface of my father's desk. The first few pages were photocopies of official land documents, showing properties I had never heard of before. Underneath those were bank records. They detailed a massive list of secret offshore money transfers, moving millions of cedis into hidden accounts. My eyes scanned the complex numbers and foreign bank names, trying to make sense of the financial puzzle. Then, I found it. At the very bottom of the stack was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. It contained one shocking, terrifying sentence written hastily in my father's handwriting. The ink was slightly smudged, showing his rush or perhaps his fear. If I die suddenly, it was not thieves. It was betrayal. I read the short sentence over and over until the letters blurred together through my sudden tears. He was murdered. The story about the armed robbers breaking into his car was a complete fabrication. Someone had wanted him dead to protect this massive secret, and they had succeeded. The truth was sitting right here in front of me, undeniable and incredibly dangerous, waiting patiently for 5 long years. The shock slowly morphed into a burning, sickening anger. For 5 years, my family had lived under a dark cloud of a lie. The police report, the sympathetic tears from relatives, the closed casket at the funeral, it was all a carefully constructed stage play. The authorities were likely paid off to look the other way, stamping his death as a random tragedy in the busy streets of Accra. I gathered the papers, my hands shaking so violently that I nearly dropped them. I needed answers. I needed to know how deep this dark conspiracy went. The old man on the phone had given me one specific instruction: ask your mother about the blue envelope. Did she know the contents, or just the existence of it? I placed the documents back into the faded blue paper and hid it carefully inside my large handbag. I paced the floor of the study, waiting for the front door to open. When I finally heard the familiar sound of my mother's key turning in the lock, my heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I walked out of the study and headed straight toward the kitchen to confront her with the painful, life-altering truth right now. My mother was placing fresh vegetables onto the kitchen counter when I walked in. She looked up, offering me a warm, tired smile. I did not smile back. I stood rigidly by the doorway, gripping my handbag tightly. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sounding much harsher than I intended. Her smile faded instantly, replaced by a look of mild confusion. "What is it, Na? You look like you have seen a ghost." I reached into my bag and pulled out the faded blue envelope. I placed it flat on the wooden dining table between us. I watched her face closely. The moment her eyes landed on the blue paper, all the color completely drained from her cheeks. She stumbled backward, dropping a large tomato onto the tiled floor. "Where did you find that?" she whispered, her voice shaking with sudden, undeniable terror. "Behind a loose panel in Dad's old study," I replied coldly. She quickly looked away, shaking her head in fierce denial. "Put it away, Nashika. I do not know what that is. Burn it right now." Her lie was obvious, hanging heavily in the tense air between us in the silent kitchen, confirming my worst possible fears right now. "Do not lie to me, Mama," I shouted, my voice cracking with deep emotional pain. "Dad wrote that if he died suddenly, it was a betrayal. He said it was not thieves. You knew." She covered her face with both hands, letting out a loud, wretched sob that tore at my heart. Her knees grew weak, and she slowly sank into a wooden kitchen chair. Under my relentless pressure, the dam finally broke. She wept bitterly, rocking back and forth. "I had to protect you," she cried softly. "I had to protect Kabi. You were both so young." She confessed the entire horrific truth. 5 years ago, my father had discovered a massive embezzlement scheme at the logistics company where he worked as a senior auditor. Millions were being systematically stolen and moved to offshore accounts. He had gathered all the concrete evidence to expose the corrupt individuals. But he made one fatal, tragic mistake before going to the authorities. He had trusted his own blood. He had taken his findings to the one person he believed would support him. He took the evidence to his younger brother to ask for his trusted advice and help to bring the guilty corporate criminals down. His brother, I whispered, feeling the room spin around me. Uncle. My mother nodded slowly, fresh tears streaming down her exhausted face. Yes, my uncle. The same uncle who visited us every Sunday, who paid for Kabi's school fees, who always sat at the head of our table. He was one of the powerful men involved in the massive embezzlement scheme. The night my father died, he had engaged in a terrible, screaming argument with family members at a private meeting. My father had boldly threatened to expose all of them the very next morning. He never made it to the next morning. His car was intercepted on a dark road. The robbery was entirely staged to look like a random street crime. The local police officers who investigated the bloody scene were heavily paid off to quickly close the case and bury the truth forever. Your uncle told me that if I ever spoke a word about the missing company funds, he would ensure you and Kabi met the exact same fate, my mother sobbed, her whole body trembling with fear. I traded the truth for your lives. I had absolutely no other choice left to keep you both completely safe from his cruel, violent hands every single day. My mother rushed forward and grabbed my hands tightly. Nah, please, she begged, her eyes wide with sheer panic. You must let this go. Your father is gone. Bringing this up will not bring him back. Do you want to bury another family member? Do you want to put your little brother in danger? Her desperate pleas echoed in the room. I looked down at her shaking hands, then at the blue envelope resting on the table. A war raged violently inside my mind. Part of me wanted to burn the documents, to forget the phone call, and to continue living our comfortable, quiet lie. But the other part of me, the protective eldest daughter who loved her father dearly, roared with fierce indignation. My uncle had stolen my father's life. He had stolen our peace. He had sat in our living room, eating our food, while his hands were stained with my father's innocent blood. I gently but firmly pulled my hands away from my weeping mother. I am sorry, Mama, I whispered, my voice hardening with new resolve. I refuse to stay silent anymore. They are going to pay for what they did to him, no matter the dangerous cost involved. That very afternoon, I took the first dangerous step. Working at the bank had taught me how to trace financial anomalies, and I knew exactly who could help expose this. I searched online and found the secure contact details of a renowned investigative journalist in Accra known for exposing corporate corruption. My fingers trembled as I typed out an anonymous, encrypted email. I did not give my name. I only attached 3 scanned pages from the blue envelope, just enough to prove the offshore accounts were real and tied to the logistics company executives. I hovered my finger over the send button. My mother's terrifying warning rang loudly in my ears. If I clicked send, I was officially crossing a dangerous point of no return. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed the button. The message flew into cyberspace. There was no taking it back now. I spent the rest of the evening jumping at every single noise outside our house, wondering if my uncle somehow already knew what I had done. The seed of doubt had fully grown into a dark, heavy tree of paranoia deeply rooted in my anxious mind, waiting for the storm. The consequences of my daring action began almost immediately. 2 days after I sent the email to the journalist, the strange things started happening. I left the bank after my shift, walking towards the busy taxi rank as usual. A black sedan with heavily tinted windows slowly pulled out of a side street and began to match my walking pace. I stopped. The car stopped. I walked faster. The car sped up. Panic flared hot and bright in my chest. I quickly ducked into a crowded supermarket, hiding among the busy aisles until my heart stopped hammering against my ribs. When I finally emerged an hour later, the black car was gone. But the creeping, suffocating paranoia remained attached to me like a dark shadow. I realized with absolute horror that we were being actively watched. Someone knew I was digging into the past. My uncle was a powerful man with eyes everywhere in the city. I looked over my shoulder the entire journey back to East Legon, clutching my bag tightly to my chest, praying silently that I had not brought a deadly curse upon my innocent family by foolishly trying to uncover the hidden truth. The intimidation tactics quickly escalated from subtle stalking to direct attacks on my life. The very next morning, I tried to pay for my transport to work using my mobile banking app. The transaction was suddenly declined. Confused, I logged into my main account. The balance showed 0, and a bold red banner across the screen declared that my account had been frozen pending an investigation. The panic of losing all financial control hit me like a physical punch to the stomach. As I stood on the dusty roadside staring at my useless phone, a new text message chimed. It was from an unregistered, unknown number. The message contained only 2 chilling words: "Stop digging." My breath caught in my throat. They were tightening the invisible noose around my neck, showing me just how easily they could ruin my life without even touching me. I realized then that the journalist must have started asking difficult questions, rattling the cages of very dangerous men. I quickly deleted the threatening text message and blocked the strange number, but the immense, cold fear had already settled deep inside my bones, warning me of the incoming disaster that was about to strike us. The threat finally hit much closer to home, exactly as my mother had feared. Later that evening, my younger brother Kabi stumbled through the front door. His school uniform was torn at the shoulder, and his bottom lip was split and bleeding heavily. My mother screamed when she saw him. I rushed over, grabbing his shoulders. "What happened to you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. Kabi looked down, wiping blood from his chin. "2 men stopped me on the way home," he whispered, his eyes wide with leftover terror. "They did not try to steal my phone or my bag. They just hit me hard and told me to tell my big sister to mind her own business." My mother turned to me, her face pale and twisted with pure agony. "I told you to stop," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "They are going to kill him, nah. They are going to kill all of us." I held Kabi tightly, feeling incredibly guilty and helpless. The people who murdered my father were now openly hunting my family, using my little brother as a pawn to enforce my silence in this dark, deadly game my uncle was playing against us today. After cleaning Kabi's wounds, a massive, explosive argument erupted in our small living room. My mother demanded that I call the journalist immediately and cancel everything. I refused. I told her that giving up now would only prove our fear and make us permanent victims. "I want justice for him," I yelled, tears streaming down my frustrated face. "He deserves justice." My mother slammed her hand hard against the wooden table. "Justice belongs to the dead, na Shika. Safety belongs to the living. If you publish those papers, you will dig 3 more graves." We stood chest to chest, both breathing heavily, trapped in an impossible, heart-wrenching situation. I could not bear to look at her terrified, pleading eyes any longer. The heavy walls of the house felt like they were closing in on me. Without saying another word, I grabbed my handbag and stormed out into the dark night. I walked quickly down the quiet, poorly lit street, my mind racing with anger, fear, and deep confusion. I needed fresh air. I needed to think clearly about my next move before it cost my family their precious lives in this terrifying battle for truth. As I walked aimlessly down the dark street, my mobile phone suddenly vibrated in my hand. I looked at the glowing screen. It was an unknown number. My heart skipped a fast beat. Against all my better judgment, I answered it. "Hello," I whispered into the dark. It was the same raspy, elderly voice from that fateful night. "You found the envelope," the old man said quietly. "Yes," I replied, looking around the empty road nervously. "Who are you?" The man sighed deeply. "I was your father's colleague at the logistics company. I knew what he was planning to do. I have stayed quiet out of fear for 5 long years. But seeing the journalist asking questions, it gave me courage." He paused, his breath rattling through the speaker. "I have my own copies of the ledgers, and I am finally ready to testify in an open court." A wave of immense relief washed over my tired body. We quickly agreed to meet the next morning at a secure, public cafe in the center of the city to combine our evidence. Finally, I had the concrete witness I desperately needed to destroy my wicked, powerful uncle forever. I rushed back to our East Legan house, eager to tell my mother the good news about the willing witness. But as I approached our front gate, a deep sense of dread settled heavy in my stomach. The gate was wide open. The front door of the house was violently kicked off its metal hinges. My heart stopped beating. "Mama!" I screamed into the silent night, sprinting up the concrete driveway. I burst into the living room, and the horrifying scene before me froze the blood in my veins. The furniture was completely overturned. Glass from broken family pictures littered the floor. Armed men dressed in dark clothing were standing in the hallway. They had broken into our home looking for the blue envelope. I hid quickly behind the broken wooden door, covering my mouth to stifle my terrified screams. I could hear Kabi crying loudly from the back bedroom. Then, I heard a loud, violent struggle. The terrifying sounds of physical violence echoed through my childhood home. The monsters had come for us in the dark, exactly as my mother had predicted they would do if I foolishly kept digging into the dark past. From my hiding spot, I heard my mother scream Kabi's name. She threw herself fiercely in front of the bedroom door, blocking the armed men from reaching my little brother. "Take me! Leave the boy alone!" she begged hysterically. One of the masked men raised his weapon without any hesitation. A loud, deafening gunshot ripped through the walls of the house, ringing in my ears like a bomb. My mother collapsed onto the hard floor. The men, realizing the loud noise would surely attract the neighbors, immediately panicked and fled out the back exit, disappearing into the dark night. I ran frantically down the hallway, slipping on the broken glass, and fell to my knees beside her bleeding body. Kabi crawled out of the room, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mama, please stay with us," I cried, pressing my hands desperately against the severe wound on her chest, trying to stop the heavy bleeding. She looked up at me, her eyes slowly losing their bright light. She tried to speak, but only a soft gasp escaped her lips. She died right there in my arms, on the cold floor, long before the sun could rise over Accra, leaving us shattered and alone. The next few days were a blur of crushing grief and police sirens. I was entirely numb, moving through the funeral preparations like a hollow ghost. The guilt ate away at my soul every single second. My mother had died protecting Kabi, directly paying the ultimate price for my stubborn refusal to let the dangerous past remain buried. Then came the day of the traditional funeral. Our compound was filled with mourners wearing red and black. I sat silently beside a deeply traumatized Kabi. Suddenly, the crowd parted respectfully. My uncle walked in, dressed in expensive black mourning clothes. He threw himself onto the ground near her casket, wailing and crying louder than anyone else in the entire compound. He played the role of the perfectly devastated, grieving brother-in-law with sickening perfection. He wiped fake tears from his eyes and hugged relative after relative. I watched him with cold, burning hatred bubbling inside my chest. He was the very man who ordered the break-in. He was the monster who murdered my father and now my mother. Yet here he was, publicly soaking in the sympathy of our blind, foolish community while my heart broke into pieces. During the solemn burial at the crowded cemetery, I kept my eyes fixed entirely on my uncle. As the priest was reading the final mournful prayers over my mother's lowering casket, I noticed something strange. My uncle pulled his mobile phone from his pocket, glanced quickly at the glowing screen, and frowned. He discreetly stepped away from the large crowd of weeping mourners, walking toward a line of parked cars near the cemetery gates. Driven by a sudden, intense suspicion, I quietly slipped away from the graveside and followed him, staying hidden behind the tall stone monuments. He held the phone to his ear, his previous tears completely vanishing, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. I crept closer, holding my breath, until I was just a few feet away, hidden by a large marble statue. I strained my ears to listen. His harsh voice cut through the quiet breeze. "You failed to find the documents in the house," he hissed angrily into the phone. "Clean up the mess immediately. The girl knows too much. She has to be dealt with tonight." The chilling words struck my heart like a very sharp knife, confirming his guilt beyond any doubt. I pressed my back hard against the cold marble statue, my hands shaking violently. Suddenly, all the confusing pieces of the puzzle fell perfectly into place inside my mind. The first mysterious phone call at midnight. It was not destiny. It was not a helpful friend trying to warn me. It was a calculated trap. Someone inside the family, likely my uncle himself, knew I was the stubborn eldest child. He knew I would search for the blue envelope if provoked. They used the call to flush out the hidden evidence my father had left behind, so they could finally track it down and destroy it. They had been watching my every move since that very night. But hearing him boldly order my assassination right next to my mother's fresh grave did not paralyze me with fear. Instead, a hot, uncontrollable anger completely burned away the last remnants of my grief and terror. I realized that hiding and staying silent would not save Kabi or me. The only way to survive was to strike back with everything I had. I turned away from the gravesite, my mind fiercely determined to end his evil reign forever, no matter the cost. I did not go back home after the burial. I took Kabi and we hid in a cheap, secure hotel on the other side of Accra. I knew that trusting the slow journalistic process was now far too dangerous. We did not have days to wait for a newspaper article. I pulled out my laptop and connected to the public internet. Instead of backing down, I decided to bypass the journalist entirely. I scanned every single page from the blue envelope, the land documents, the offshore bank transfers, and my father's handwritten note. I wrote a detailed, emotional post explaining exactly how my father was murdered and how the robbery was entirely staged. I named my uncle explicitly. I detailed the attack on my home and the tragic murder of my innocent mother. I posted the entire folder of evidence onto Twitter, Facebook, and multiple anonymous local blogs simultaneously. I tagged every major news network, anti-corruption agency, and human rights group in Ghana. I hit the publish button, sending the ugly, hidden truth out into the bright light of the world, knowing there was absolutely no turning back for any of us now as the fire started spreading. The explosive story went viral almost immediately. By the next morning, the internet was completely ablaze. Radio stations across Accra abandoned their scheduled programming to discuss the leaked documents. Social media trended with my father's name for days. The overwhelming public outrage was swift and merciless. Angry protests erupted outside the logistics company's headquarters, demanding immediate answers. Faced with undeniable, publicly available evidence, the authorities had no choice but to act quickly to save their own reputations. The closed case of my father's staged robbery was officially reopened. That same afternoon, police stormed my uncle's massive mansion and arrested him, along with 2 other senior executives named in the offshore transfers. To seal their fate, the elderly man, my father's brave colleague, stepped forward publicly and officially testified to the police about the embezzlement scheme. The corrupt empire my uncle had built on my family's blood rapidly crumbled into dust. The truth had finally surfaced, wild and uncontrollable, breaking the heavy chains of silence that had bound my family in dark fear for 5 long, miserable years. Justice had finally arrived, sweeping through the city like a massive, unstoppable storm of righteousness. Months later, Kabi and I permanently moved out of our house in East Legon. We relocated to a much smaller, quieter neighborhood on the outskirts of the busy city. Life is much harder now without her, but it is finally honest. There are no more lies, no more dark secrets, and no more looking over my shoulder in absolute terror. One Sunday afternoon, I visited the quiet cemetery where my parents now lay buried side by side. I placed fresh yellow flowers gently on my mother's grave. I knelt in the soft grass and whispered softly into the wind, "If I had ignored that phone call, you would still be here." A long, heavy pause hung in the peaceful air. But the truth would still be buried in the dark. I closed my eyes, letting the warm sun hit my face. For the first time, I understood something incredibly painful but true. Some phone calls completely destroy your life, tearing away everything you love. But others boldly reveal it, forcing you to step into the light. I stood up, took my little brother's hand, and walked away from the graves, finally ready to face our new tomorrow, walking with my head held high.